The VIP section of the Argento hummed with the kind of dangerous energy that made ordinary people cross the street. 20 members of the Iron Fist Motorcycle Club filled the private dining hall, their leather cuts displaying patches that told stories of loyalty, violence, and brotherhood. Armed bodyguards, men paid 6 figures annually, stood at strategic positions, watching the doors, scanning the windows, their hands never far from concealed weapons. But they weren't watching the 7-year-old girl in the pink dress. Mia's face was turning blue. A piece of prime ribeye had lodged in her windpipe with surgical precision, sealing off her airway completely. She couldn't scream. She couldn't cough. She couldn't make a single sound. Her small hands clutched at her throat in the universal sign of choking, but the celebration around her drowned out everything except the pounding music and raucous laughter. 30 seconds. That's how long her brain had before irreversible damage began. Mateo Cruz, a 19-year-old busboy who could barely make rent on his studio apartment, was the only person in that room full of killers who saw the terror in her eyes. To save her, he had to do the unthinkable, sprint past a security perimeter designed to stop assassins, shove aside armed guards, and put his hands on the warlord's daughter. The bodyguards drew their weapons. The manager screamed, "You're fired." But when a chunk of meat hit the marble floor and the girl gasped for air, the room went dead silent. Mateo had just saved the princess, and the men who almost killed him were about to have a very bad night. The alley behind the Argento smelled like expensive garbage, truffle oil, aged wine, and discarded lobster shells. Mateo Cruz sat on an overturned milk crate, his white button-down shirt already showing sweat stains from 4 hours of nonstop table service. In his lap sat a worn set of EMT flashcards, their edges soft from constant handling. Heimlich maneuver, he muttered, flipping to the next card. Abdominal thrusts. Stand behind victim. Fist above navel. Quick upward compressions until object is expelled or victim loses consciousness. His phone buzzed. 3 minutes left on his 15-minute break. Mateo had memorized every card in this deck 17 times, but he kept reviewing. In 6 weeks, he'd take his emergency medical technician certification exam. In 6 weeks, he could stop carrying water pitchers and start saving lives. In 6 weeks, he could finally become something more than invisible. Cruz, get your lazy behind in here. Stefano Russo's voice could cut through concrete. The restaurant manager appeared in the doorway, his perfectly tailored suit and slick-back hair making him look like a villain from a mafia movie, which, Mateo reflected, wasn't far from the truth. My break doesn't end for 3 more minutes, Mateo said, not looking up from his cards. Your break ends when I say it ends. Stefano's Italian accent thickened when he was angry, which was always. Mrs. Chun at table 7 has been waiting for her water refill for 2 whole minutes. 2 minutes. Do you know what kind of online review that creates? Mateo stood, pocketing his flashcards. I spent 5 minutes helping Mrs. Chin's mother into her wheelchair earlier. She has severe arthritis in both knees, and I don't pay you to be a doctor, Cruz. I pay you to bust tables and stay invisible. The fancy people don't want to see you. They don't want to know you exist. They just want their water glasses full and their plates cleared. Can you handle that? Or do I need to find someone who can? Mateo bit back his response. He needed this job. The EMT certification course cost $1,200, and he still owed $400. His studio apartment rent was due in 8 days. His mother's medication cost $200 monthly, even with insurance. I can handle it, he said quietly. Good. Because tonight is VIP night. The Iron Fists reserve the entire private dining hall. Do you know who they are? Everyone in the city knew who the Iron Fists were. The motorcycle club controlled half the construction contracts, 3/4 of the shipping docks, and 100% of the politicians who mattered. Their president, a man called Brick, had more power than the mayor. I know who they are, Mateo said. Then you know that if anything goes wrong tonight, anything, I will throw you out of this restaurant so fast your head will spin. These men tip in thousands, Cruz. Thousands. But only if the service is perfect. Invisible. Understand? Invisible, Mateo repeated. Got it. Stefano's lip curled. And fix your shirt. You look like you slept in it. At 7:47 p.m., the Iron Fists arrived. Mateo heard them before he saw them. the deep rumble of 20 Harley-Davidson motorcycles rolling up to the restaurant's valet area like motorized thunder. Through the kitchen's service window, he watched them dismount. Men in leather cuts covered with patches, their faces weathered by wind and sun, their eyes hard with the kind of experience that came from living on the edge of society's rules. At the center of the group walked Brick. He was massive, 6'5", at least 280 pounds, with arms like concrete pillars and a beard that hung halfway down his chest. His leather cut displayed patches from 3 decades of club membership. President, founder, original. He moved with the calm confidence of a man who'd never had to prove anything to anyone. In his right hand, he held the small hand of a 7-year-old girl. She wore a pink dress with white lace, patent leather shoes, and had her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The contrast was jarring. This delicate little princess walking beside a mountain of motorcycle leather and barely contained violence. "That's his daughter," whispered Carlos, one of the other busboys. "Mia lost her mother to cancer 2 years ago. Word is, Brick would burn down the entire city for that kid." Mateo watched as the group filed into the private dining hall. 6 bodyguards came with them, huge men in dark suits with the telltale bulges of shoulder holsters. They immediately began securing the room, checking sightlines, testing the locks on the service entrance. "Cruz." Stefano appeared beside him, snapping his fingers. "You're on water duty for the private hall. Keep the pitchers full, keep your mouth shut, and for the love of God, do not make eye contact with anyone. These men eat people like you for breakfast." "Understood. And Carlos will handle the actual service. You just do the water. Nothing else. Can you manage that?" Mateo nodded, grabbing 2 pitchers of ice water from the service station. The private dining hall had been transformed. The long table was set with the Argento's finest china, crystal wine glasses, and silverware that cost more than Mateo made in a month. Candles flickered in the center, casting warm light across the faces of men who looked like they'd seen things that would make normal people wake up screaming. Brick sat at the head of the table with Mia beside him. She had a booster seat and a special plate decorated with cartoon characters. The massive biker cut her steak into small pieces with the gentle precision of a surgeon, then kissed the top of her head. "You like the mashed potatoes, baby girl? They're yummy, Daddy." Her voice was small and sweet, completely out of place in a room full of criminals. Mateo began his rounds, moving from glass to glass like a ghost. The bodyguards tracked him with their eyes, hands drifting toward weapons each time he got within 10 feet of Brick or Mia. He kept his movements slow and predictable, making sure they could see both his hands at all times. Invisible, he reminded himself. Just be invisible. The club members were celebrating something. A successful negotiation, maybe, or a business deal gone right. They were loud, telling stories, laughing at jokes that Mateo didn't understand and definitely didn't want to understand. Wine flowed. Steaks arrived. The energy in the room was electric with male camaraderie and the kind of loyalty that could only be forged through shared danger. Mateo refilled glasses, cleared bread plates, and tried not to think about the EMT flashcards in his pocket. In 6 weeks, he wouldn't have to be invisible anymore. In 6 weeks, he'd be the person everyone wanted to see. The first responder, the lifesaver, the one who mattered. He was refilling the water glass of a man with a scar across his neck when he first noticed something wrong. Mia was laughing at something her father had said. The sound was pure and joyful, a child's giggle that somehow made the dangerous men around her smile. She reached for another piece of the steak her father had cut, popped it into her mouth, and chewed while Brick told a story about a fishing trip gone hilariously wrong. Then she inhaled sharply. Mateo saw it happen. He was 12 feet away, near the service door, and he had a perfect angle on her face. The piece of steak, maybe slightly too large, maybe not chewed completely, went down the wrong pipe at exactly the wrong moment. It lodged in her trachea with the precision of a bullet finding its mark. Mia's eyes went wide. Her hands flew to her throat in the universal choking sign. The gesture that every EMT student learned on day 1, the desperate signal that meant, "I can't breathe." But she made no sound. That's what people don't understand about choking. In movies, people cough and sputter and make a scene. In reality, when the airway is completely blocked, there's nothing. No cough, no cry, just silence. Mia's face began to change color. Pink faded to red. Red began its terrible transition to purple. Mateo's training took over. His mind automatically calculated the timeline. 15 seconds. Victim realizes they can't breathe. Panic sets in. 30 seconds. Face discoloration begins. Oxygen deprivation starts. 60 seconds. Loss of consciousness likely. 90 seconds. Permanent brain damage becomes probable. They were at 15 seconds. Brick was still telling his fishing story, gesturing with his wine glass, completely unaware that his daughter was dying beside him. The bodyguards were watching the windows, the doors, the service entrance, scanning for external threats while the real danger was already inside. 20 seconds. Mia's small hands clawed at her throat. Tears streamed down her face. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. No one at the table noticed because they were all listening to Brick's punchline. Mateo dropped his water pitcher. The crystal shattered on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned toward him. The bodyguards' hands went to their weapons. But Mateo was already moving. Time seemed to slow down as Mateo sprinted across the private dining hall. His EMT training had taught him that in a true emergency, hesitation kills. Every second spent asking permission, every moment wasted seeking approval, was a second that the victim's brain was dying. Mia needed help. Now, a bodyguard stepped into his path, a mountain of muscle in a tailored suit. Hey, where do you think you're? Mateo didn't stop. He was smaller, lighter, faster. He dropped his shoulder and slid under the guard's grabbing arms like a baseball player stealing second base, his sneakers finding purchase on the polished marble floor. Stop him, someone shouted. 30 seconds. Brick looked up from his story, confusion crossing his face. What the hell? Mateo reached Mia just as her face completed its transition from red to purple. Her eyes were rolling back. Her small body had begun the involuntary spasms that preceded unconsciousness. He grabbed her from behind, lifting her out of the booster seat. His arms wrapped around her tiny torso, finding the correct position, fist just above the navel, other hand grasping the fist, both positioned below the ribcage to avoid breaking bones. Get your hands off her, Brick roared, launching himself from his chair. The bodyguards converged from all sides. But Mateo had already begun the Heimlich maneuver. Quick, upward thrusts. Compress the diaphragm. Force the air out of the lungs. Use that air pressure to dislodge the obstruction. First thrust. Nothing. He's attacking the boss's kid, a bodyguard yelled. Second thrust. Still nothing. Hands grabbed Mateo's shoulders, trying to pull him away. He held on tighter, keeping Mia locked in position. Third thrust. The piece of steak shot out of Mia's mouth like a cork from a champagne bottle. It arced through the air and landed on the white tablecloth with a wet sound. Mia gasped. The sound of that breath, that first desperate inhalation of oxygen, was the most beautiful thing Mateo had ever heard. She gulped air like a drowning person breaking the surface, her small chest heaving, her face slowly returning from purple to red to pink. Then she started crying. Daddy, she wailed. Daddy, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe in. A fist connected with Mateo's jaw. The world exploded in stars and pain. Mateo's head snapped back as the bodyguard's punch landed with the force of a sledgehammer. He staggered, his grip on Mia loosening, and immediately another guard grabbed him from behind. Got him. They slammed Mateo face first into the wall. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent his EMT flashcards scattering across the floor. A knee pressed into his spine, arms wrenched behind his back. The cold metal of a gun barrel pressed against his skull. Don't move, a voice growled in his ear. Don't even breathe. Through the ringing in his ears, Mateo heard Mia sobbing. He heard Brick's boots stomping across the floor. He heard the other club members shouting questions, confusion filling the room like smoke. What just happened? The busboy attacked her. Where did he come from? Brick, she okay? Brick's massive frame filled Mateo's peripheral vision. The club president had scooped his daughter into his arms and was holding her against his chest, his face a mask of shock and rage and fear. Mia, baby, talk to me. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? And no, Daddy. Mia sobbed into his shoulder. I couldn't breathe and he helped me. The piece of steak was stuck and I couldn't breathe and he. She dissolved into tears again, her small body shaking. The bodyguard pressing Mateo into the wall didn't ease up. If anything, the gun barrel pressed harder against his skull. Blood dripped from Mateo's nose, painting small red dots on the marble floor. "Boss," the bodyguard said, his voice uncertain now. "What do you want us to do with him?" Brick stared at his daughter, then at the piece of steak on the tablecloth, then at Mateo pinned against the wall. His face was unreadable, a mix of emotions fighting for dominance behind those hard eyes. Before he could answer, the dining hall doors burst open. Stefano Russo rushed into the room like a man running from a fire. His face was sheet white, his perfectly styled hair disheveled from the sprint from his office. Behind him came two more restaurant security guards, looking confused and alarmed. "Mr. Brick." "Sir, I am so sorry." Stefano's accent was thick with panic. "I don't know what happened. I don't know how this employee got past your security, but I assure you, your employee just attacked my daughter," Brick said quietly. The softness of his voice was more terrifying than any shout. "He didn't attack me," Mia protested, pulling her face from her father's shoulder. "Daddy, he saved me. I was choking and nobody saw, and he—" "Hush, baby girl. Let Daddy handle this." Stefano's eyes darted from Brick to Mia to the bodyguards to Mateo still pinned against the wall. Mateo could see the calculation happening behind those eyes, the manager weighing his options, deciding how to minimize liability, how to protect the restaurant's reputation, how to save his own skin. "You," Stefano pointed at Mateo with a shaking finger. "You idiot. What did you do?" "He saved your daughter's life," Mateo said through swelling lips. "She was choking. I performed the Heimlich. You touched a VIP guest." Stefano's voice climbed several octaves. "You put your hands on Mr. Brick's daughter. Do you have any idea at all, what you've done?" "I saved her life," Mateo repeated. Blood dripped from his chin. "You're fired," Stefano screamed. "Fired. Terminated. You will never work in this city again. I will personally ensure that every restaurant, every hotel, every service establishment knows what you did here tonight." "What I did," Mateo said slowly, "was save a little girl from choking to death while everyone else stood around doing nothing." "Get him out of here," Stefano told the bodyguards. "Get him out before I call the police and have him arrested for assault." "Now hold on a second," Brick began, but Stefano was already signaling his own security guards. "You heard me. Get this criminal out of my restaurant." The bodyguard pulled Mateo away from the wall. Restaurant security grabbed his arms. Together, they dragged him toward the service exit, his sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. "Wait," Brick said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I want to." But Mateo was already being hauled through the kitchen, past shocked cooks and servers, toward the back alley. Someone opened the metal door, and they literally threw him out into the darkness. Mateo hit the pavement hard, rolling across dirty concrete. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound of finality. He lay there for a moment, tasting blood, his jaw throbbing, his back screaming where the knee had pressed into his spine. His EMT flashcards were still inside, scattered on the dining hall floor. His water pitcher was shattered. His job was gone. But Mia was alive. She was breathing. That had to count for something. Slowly, painfully, Mateo pushed himself to his feet and started the long walk home. Inside the private dining hall, silence had fallen like a shroud. Brick sat back down with Mia in his lap, her face buried in his chest, her small body still trembling from fear and tears. The other club members had gone quiet, their celebration forgotten. The bodyguards stood in a loose circle, looking uncertain and slightly ashamed. "Someone get me the security footage," Brick said quietly. "Now." "Boss, the kid's gone," one of the bodyguards protested. "The manager handled it. We can just—" "I said get me the footage. Now." The bodyguard pulled out his phone and made a call. 3 minutes later, Stefano appeared with a tablet, his hands still shaking. "Mr. Brick, I assure you that employee will face the fullest. Show me the cameras." Stefano tapped the screen, pulling up the security feed. The dining hall had 4 angles, one from each corner. He queued up the footage from 7 minutes ago. Brick watched in silence. On the screen, Mia took a bite of steak. She laughed at something Brick said. Then her expression changed, eyes widening, hands flying to her throat. The universal choking sign, clear as day. But on the video, nobody at the table noticed. Brick was gesturing, telling his fishing story. The other club members were laughing. The bodyguards were facing outward, scanning for external threats. Mia's face began to change color. red to purple. Her mouth opened and closed silently. Tears streamed down her face. 20 seconds passed. Still, nobody noticed. Then, from the edge of the frame, a figure in white dropped something and sprinted across the room. The busboy, the kid they'd just beaten and thrown into an alley. Freeze that, Brick said. Stefano froze the frame. On screen, Matteo was mid-stride, his eyes locked on Mia with laser focus. While every bodyguard in the room was looking elsewhere, at doors, at windows, at imaginary threats, this 19-year-old kid making minimum wage had seen the real danger. Play it. The footage continued. A bodyguard stepped in Matteo's path. The kid slid under him like water, never breaking stride. Hands grabbed at him. He kept going. He reached Mia and lifted her, his hands positioning in the exact correct placement for the Heimlich maneuver. Brick watched himself roar and launch from his chair. Watched the bodyguards converge. Watched Matteo hold on, performing the thrusts with textbook precision. The piece of steak shot out. Mia gasped for air. She started crying. And then the bodyguards attacked her rescuer. Brick watched them slam the kid into the wall. Watched blood spray from his nose. Watched Stefano rush in and fire him while he was still pinned by armed guards. The tablet screen went dark. The silence in the room was absolute. Brick looked at each of his 6 bodyguards in turn. These were men he paid $120,000 annually. Men trained in defensive tactics, threat assessment, close protection. Men who were supposed to be the best in the business. 23 seconds, Brick said quietly. I just watched my daughter choke for 23 seconds. Right here. Right beside me. And none of you saw it. The bodyguards stared at the floor. A busboy, a kid who makes $12 an hour carrying water pitchers, saw what 6 supposed professionals missed. He risked getting shot. He risked getting beaten. He risked his job. And he saved my daughter's life while you all stood around with your hands in your pockets. Boss, we were watching for, one guard began. For what? Assassins? Rival clubs? Someone trying to shoot me. Brick's voice was rising now, the rage building like pressure in a boiler. My daughter was dying 2 feet away from me, and you were watching for ghosts. He stood, gently setting Mia in her chair. She was calm now, breathing easily, but her eyes were red from crying. You're all fired, Brick said. All 6 of you. Turn in your patches, your equipment, everything. You're done. Boss, you can't. I can and I am. The roar filled the room like thunder. A kid with a water pitcher did your job better than you did with guns. Get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. The bodyguards shuffled out, heads down, completely humiliated. Brick turned to Stefano, who had gone even paler than before. And you, Mr. Brick, I was just trying to protect the restaurants. You fired the boy who saved my daughter's life. I didn't know. I thought he was attacking her. I was trying to. Where is he? Who? The busboy. Where did he go? Stefano swallowed hard. I don't know. We threw him out the back. He's probably. Find him. Sir. I said find him. Brick's fist slammed down on the table hard enough to make the wine glasses jump. You have 1 hour. I want to know his name, his address, where he goes to school, where he buys groceries, everything. And if I find out you've harmed one more hair on his head, I will burn this restaurant to the ground with you inside it. Are we clear? Stefano nodded frantically and ran from the room. Brick turned to the remaining club members, who had watched the entire scene in stunned silence. Brothers, he said quietly, we're going to find that kid. And we're going to make this right. Matteo's nose had stopped bleeding, but his jaw felt like someone had hit it with a crowbar, which, essentially, they had. He sat on the edge of his mattress in his tiny studio apartment, holding a bag of frozen peas against his face and trying not to think about how he was going to make rent in 8 days. The EMT certification test was in 6 weeks. He still owed $400 for the course. Now he had no job and no prospects. Stefano would make sure of that. The restaurant industry in this city was tight-knit. Word would spread. Nobody would hire him. Maybe he could do delivery driving. Maybe construction day labor. Maybe. Someone pounded on his door. Matteo froze. It was 11:47 p.m. Nobody came to his building at this hour. Nobody good, anyway. The pounding came again, harder this time. Cruz, we know you're in there. Through the peephole, Matteo saw them. 3 members of the Iron Fists, their leather cuts unmistakable even in the dim hallway light. His heart rate doubled. They'd found him. Of course they'd found him. People like that could find anyone. He considered not answering, considered climbing out his window and running. But he was on the 4th floor, and he was tired of running. Mateo opened the door. The 3 bikers stared at him, at his swollen jaw, his bloody shirt, the purple bruise forming around his eye. "You Mateo Cruz?" the tallest one asked. "Yeah. You need to come with us." "Look, I'm sorry about. Boss wants to see you. I didn't do anything wrong. I was trying to help, and—" "Nobody said you did anything wrong, kid. Boss wants to see you. That's all." Mateo weighed his options. He could refuse and spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, or he could face whatever was coming. "Let me grab a clean shirt." The Argento looked different at midnight. The dinner crowd was gone, the dining room dark except for emergency lighting. The Iron Fist motorcycles were still parked out front, a line of chrome and leather that screamed danger to anyone with working instincts. The bikers led Mateo through the front door, past the hostess stand, toward the private dining hall. His hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets so they wouldn't see. The doors opened. Brick sat at the head of the long table, exactly where he'd been hours before. Mia was asleep on a bench against the wall, covered with someone's leather cut like a blanket. Stefano stood in the corner, looking like he might vomit at any moment. Brick stood when Mateo entered. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the massive motorcycle club president and the skinny busboy with the black eye. Then Brick crossed the room in 3 strides and did something Mateo never expected. He dropped to one knee. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Brick said quietly. "You saved my daughter's life. You risked everything to save her when nobody else even saw she was in danger. I'm told you're studying to be a paramedic?" Mateo nodded, too shocked to speak. "And this piece of garbage fired you for being a hero." Brick jerked his thumb at Stefano, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "That's going to be corrected. Stefano, you have something to say?" "I'm sorry," Stefano whispered. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have." "Louder." "I'm sorry." Stefano's voice cracked. "I was wrong. I was scared and I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry." "You're also fired," Brick said calmly. "Effective immediately. Your career in this city's hospitality industry is over. Nobody who treats a hero like that deserves to manage a lemonade stand." Stefano's face crumpled, but he didn't argue. He just shuffled out of the room, a broken man. Brick turned back to Mateo. "As for you, son, I want to make this right. I'm told your EMT certification costs money." "Oh yeah? For $100 still. But I can. Consider it paid. Full tuition, full books, whatever you need. And when you finish, I've got a job for you if you want it. The Iron Fists need a medical officer, someone who knows how to keep people alive when things go wrong. Pays better than water pitchers, I promise." Mateo's throat felt tight. "You don't have to." "I do have to. You saved the most important person in my world. There's no debt bigger than that." Brick extended his hand. "What do you say?" Mateo looked at the offered hand. At this dangerous man who controlled half the city. At the sleeping girl who was alive because he'd paid attention when nobody else had. He shook Brick's hand. "Thank you," Mateo said. "But I need you to know, I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because she needed help and I was the only one who saw it." Brick's grip tightened. "That's exactly why you're the right person for the job." 3 days later, Mateo received a package at his apartment. Inside was a check for $5,000, more money than he'd ever seen in his life. The memo line read, "EMT tuition plus living expenses." There was also a leather jacket with the Iron Fist emblem on the back and a patch that read, "Medical Officer," and a note in neat handwriting. "The jacket is optional. The gratitude is eternal. My door is always open. Brick." Mateo hung the jacket in his closet, cashed the check, and paid 6 months of rent in advance. He bought his mother's medications for the next year. He enrolled in the advanced EMT course, the one he'd been afraid to consider because it cost too much. And he studied. 6 weeks later, Mateo Cruz passed his EMT certification exam with a score of 97%. The instructor, a grizzled paramedic with 30 years of experience, shook his hand and said, "I've never seen someone so naturally gifted at reading emergencies. You've got instincts, Cruz. Don't waste them." Mateo didn't waste them. He took a job with the city's ambulance service, working 48-hour shifts that left him exhausted and exhilarated. He saved lives. He performed CPR on a construction worker whose heart had stopped. He delivered a baby in the back of the ambulance when they couldn't make it to the hospital in time. He pulled 3 teenagers from a car wreck and kept them alive until the trauma surgeons could take over. And once a month, he reported to the Iron Fist compound to serve as their medical officer. The first time he showed up, the club members had been skeptical. Who was this skinny kid who thought he could handle biker injuries? But after Mateo stitched up a knife wound, set a broken collarbone, and correctly diagnosed appendicitis in a member who thought he just had a stomachache, the skepticism evaporated. Mateo became part of the family. 2 years after the choking incident, Mateo Cruz was no longer invisible. He drove a new Ford F-150, a gift from Brick for saving a club member from bleeding out after a motorcycle accident. He had completed his paramedic certification and was working toward medical school. He had moved into a real apartment with actual furniture and could afford to take his mother to nice restaurants. But more importantly, he had purpose. On a warm Saturday in June, Mateo stood in the Iron Fist compound, organizing a first aid training session for new members. His uniform, dark blue EMT gear with the club's emblem stitched on the sleeve, marked him as someone who belonged. Mia, now 9 years old, sat on a picnic table watching him demonstrate CPR on a training dummy. She wore her own miniature leather cut, a gift from her father, and took notes in a pink notebook. "So you pushed down 2 inches, right?" she asked. "At least 2 inches," Mateo corrected. "And you keep going until help arrives or the person starts breathing on their own. Never give up." "Never give up," Mia repeated, writing it down carefully. Brick walked over, a rare smile on his weathered face. "She wants to be a doctor now. Says if you could save her life, she can save someone else's." "She'd be good at it," Mateo said. "She pays attention to details. That's the most important skill." "Funny," Brick said. "That's what I remember about you. That night at the Argento, everyone else was looking outward. You were the only one looking at what mattered." Mateo shrugged. "I just saw someone who needed help. And that's what makes you different from most people." Brick clapped him on the shoulder, gently, for Brick. "By the way, I heard about what you did last week. Pulled that family out of the burning car on Route 7. That was my job. That was heroic. The father called me, wanted to find a way to thank you. Turns out he does contracting work for one of my businesses. Small world. Is everyone in this city connected to you somehow?" "Pretty much." Brick grinned. "But that's not why he called. He called because his 8-year-old son is alive, because you ran into a burning car to get him. Said you didn't even hesitate." Mateo thought about that moment. The smoke, the flames, the child's face visible through the rear window. He'd broken the glass with his equipment bag, pulled the kid out, carried him to safety while the gas tank threatened to explode. "Someone needed help," Mateo said simply. "I was the only one who could reach him. Just like with Mia. Just like with Mia." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Mia practice chest compressions on the dummy. She was serious about it, counting out loud, making sure her form was perfect. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Brick said quietly. "I think about how different my life would be if you'd been on break that night. If you'd been in the back alley studying your flashcards instead of in that dining room. If you'd been afraid to act." "I try not to think about that," Mateo admitted. "Me too. But it reminds me that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we almost didn't notice. The invisible ones. The helpers. The heroes who don't look like heroes." Brick pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. "This is for you. Open it." Inside was a gold pin in the shape of the Iron Fist's emblem. Unlike the cloth patches on leather cuts, this was delicate and beautiful, the kind of thing you'd wear on formal occasions. "We had it made special," Brick said. "For the man who saved my daughter. For the brother who proves every day that being tough isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you're willing to sacrifice for people who can't save themselves." Mateo's throat felt tight. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing what you're doing. Keep seeing what others miss. Keep running toward the danger. Keep being you." "I can do that." "Good." Brick squeezed his shoulder. "Because this city needs more people like you. People who don't hesitate. People who act. People who save lives while everyone else is watching for ghosts." 3 years after that night at the Argento, the restaurant closed permanently. Stefano Russo's firing had been just the beginning. Reviews revealed systematic health code violations, staff mistreatment, and financial irregularities. The building became a medical clinic. 6 years after that night, Mateo Cruz graduated from medical school with honors. He specialized in emergency medicine, shocking no one who knew him. At his graduation, He wore the gold Iron Fist's pin on his lapel. Brick and Mia sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. 10 years after that night, Dr. Mateo Cruz was the head of the city's trauma center. He had saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. He had trained dozens of new doctors and paramedics, teaching them the same lesson he'd learned carrying water pitchers. Pay attention. See what others miss. Act when everyone else freezes. And he still wore the pin. Because he never forgot the night when being invisible meant being the only person who saw what mattered. The night when a 7-year-old girl in a pink dress couldn't breathe, and a 19-year-old busboy with nothing to lose decided that some deaths were worth any price. The night everything changed. On warm Saturday afternoons, you might see them at the park. Dr. Mateo Cruz and Mia Hernandez, now a pre-med student herself, sitting on a bench and reviewing anatomy flashcards. Heimlich maneuver, she says, flipping a card. Abdominal thrusts, fist above navel, quick upward compressions, he recites automatically. But you know what the most important part is? What? Seeing that the person needs help in the first place. Recognition before action. Awareness before intervention. You can have all the training in the world, but if you're not paying attention, it doesn't matter. Mia nods, writing this down in her notebook. The same pink notebook she's been using for years, now worn soft at the edges. Is that why you became a doctor? She asks. Because you paid attention that night? Mateo thinks about this. I became a doctor because I learned that the most important person in any emergency isn't the strongest or the loudest. It's the one who sees what everyone else misses. The invisible observer who becomes a visible hero when it matters most. You were never really invisible, though. Were you? Everyone's invisible until they choose not to be. In the distance, the rumble of motorcycles announces the Iron Fist's weekly ride. Brick waves as they pass. 20 leather-clad riders, now including Mia's older brother and several members Mateo has personally saved over the years. The doctor and the student wave back. Then they return to their flashcards, studying in the sunshine, preparing for the next time someone needs help, and they're the only ones paying attention. Because some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen, and others spend their whole lives seeing what matters. The difference, Mateo has learned, makes all the difference in the world.